I turned 15 years old in 1984. Within walking distance of our home, my dad and I would ride three-wheelers through mud holes. Kids like me who didn't have a driver's license often didn't have many fun things to do down south. Some people might have thought these rides were a good way to spend time with Dad, but I didn't. This kept me from going back to the house, where my mom was busy setting up for the surprise party I had been looking forward to for weeks. I would spend the day with her dad if that made her happy. There were lots of shocks and dangers in the mud pits. The trails through the trees were dangerous, and three-wheelers weren't exactly known for being safe. It would be easy for a careless rider to flip one over. A student from my school seemed to show up every day with a cast or crutches. It had only been 6 months since I broke my wrist. While I followed my dad, we sped up as fast as we could. Next, I hit a bend, lost control, and crashed into a big tree. It's not like everything went dark. Instead, I felt like I was in my body 1 second and then flying above it, high above it. Although I was bent, I saw my dad running toward me. I almost yelled, "I'm up here," but I knew he couldn't hear me. My path did not lead to a cave or a bright light. It was more like I was floating higher into space, above the atmosphere. It was incredible to look back at Earth. I thought that my body was down there, but I didn't know how long I had been flying before something caught my eye. A beam made of light that changed brightness came up to me. Although it wasn't dim, it changed from bright to dim, but it was always stunning. "It is not your time," the beam told me mentally. I didn't think twice about this way of communicating because it felt normal and easy. We soon had a second being of light join us, and they chose to show me him. It looked like we were floating through space, which was cool. We finally found a very large planet. I saw towns that were much bigger than any on Earth from above. Everything in the scenery was spotless and perfect, very different from our world. I really wanted to land in one of those towns and meet an alien race, but I didn't. Instead, we landed on top of a mountain, where I could see a stream that was better than any I had ever seen. There was a man standing behind me. He was wearing long white robes with gold details. The shoes he wore were simple and old. His face looked strange, but it had a Middle Eastern look to it when he turned around. "You really fell, but you weren't supposed to be here yet," he told her. "You noticed that?" I inquired. His answer was, "I saw you come in early. Have you thought about what you want to do?" When I was confused, I asked again, "What would I like to do?" He turned to face the other being and said, he still doesn't have all of his memories. Then the thing touched my hands, and I started to get a lot of information. I now understood everything. So much information it was hard to believe. This wasn't my first, second, or even 10th time living on Earth, I realized. The present, the past, and the future all happen at the same time. I found out that this is where all souls go after leaving this world. People can choose to reincarnate, but they don't have to. A soul must make a deal in order to be sent to Earth. There are other ways for souls to learn and grow besides rebirth as well. Why do you have to come to Earth? I asked out loud. With poverty, food, war, and other problems, it looks like a tough deal. Quickly, the answer came. I learned that Earth contracts give us access to information and events that we can't get in our pure, peaceful home. The point of being on Earth is to feel and understand feelings that our home planet can't give us. How can someone really understand how bad pain is if they've never been through it? You can't understand love if you've never felt hate. Some souls only visit Earth once, while others come back many times. I asked, why don't you just teach about how harsh it is without going through it yourself? To which I answered, would you understand what I mean if I told you something is hot, but you've never felt heat? I couldn't argue with the way he thought. His points were very strong. He looked closely at me and asked, "Are you ready to go back and finish your contract on Earth?" I needed to return. I really wanted to stay with him, but I had a promise to keep here on Earth, and I was going to do it. My family was around my hospital bed when I woke up. My mother got very emotional and screamed with joy when I tried to sit up, even though the doctors had told her not to. They said I took a plane to the hospital, but I don't remember it. My nose and cheekbone were broken in the crash, and my brain swelled up a lot, so I had to have emergency surgery. Unfortunately, both of my eyes were badly hurt. I seemed like I was dead, The doctor finally let me go home after 4 more days in the hospital, and my mom made my dad sell our three-wheelers. Even though it was over a week late, my surprise party happened, and I was really shocked because it wasn't even my birthday yet. After a few weeks, I started to forget about my near-death experience. Even though I never shared them, I wrote them down to keep them safe. In the South, people who talk about meeting Jesus and resurrection would be laughed at and even punished. For curing, my mom would have sent me to the closest Christian school for boys. To this day, I still respect my privacy. A lot of people don't believe in an afterlife that isn't taught by traditional faiths. I appreciate you letting me tell my story. Best regards. Within 2 days of Thanksgiving in 1997, my grandma and I were involved in a car accident. That night, it rained a lot. The car went through several hydroplaning spins before it crashed into a culvert. I was thrown off the car. When my grandma tried to keep me safe, she hurt her right wrist and my left wrist. I hit a tree after throwing myself 60 feet. I crawled back to her, holding her head in my lap as I did so. I was covered in glass and other debris. It was scary and upsetting, and I felt completely alone on that dark, empty highway. I thought, thank God, someone is coming to help when I saw headlights off in the distance. When the truck slowed down, 2 people ran toward us. Sister Teresa, my new youth leader, called. We joined her church not long ago. She asked for my name, number, and address, but I told her to pray instead. I thought that God was the only one who could save us. Even though I hoped very hard for my grandmother's life, she didn't make it. It was during the prayers of Sister Teresa and the youth group that I either passed out or died. From there, I saw the scene from a different angle, as if I were floating above it. Everyone was praying, and I could see and hear them. But I could also see myself from afar, as if I were looking down and to the side. I became aware that I was not in my body, but the pain and stress left me right away. Then I felt someone on my left. It was so bright that I couldn't see anything. There was no face in what I saw, only a tall, bright thing that looked like a fire, but wasn't hot or cold. It was an indescribable white gold color, like the midday sun, and even though it didn't speak, I felt so much love and care for it. It touched my left side, close to my stomach. I felt very connected to my body at that very moment. It was like nothing I had ever felt before or since, made me feel warm and happy all over. It occurred to me that this being was always filled with such perfect love and joy. I didn't feel bad about leaving anything or anyone on earth behind because I wanted to stay with it. It was like coming home and I felt drawn to this being. But the thing ignored my wish and didn't do anything. Through a kind of telepathic information, this was sent. I stopped being sad about my grandmother's death when I realized she was moving toward this thing. I thought her luck was really great. In terrestrial time, the whole thing only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like minutes. I was pulled back into my body against my will and couldn't stay. After waking up, I saw a group of people praying for me. The ambulance got ready for a long trip to the closest hospital that could help me. My grandfather was told by the rescuers that they didn't think I would make it through the trip alive. Because my mom got to the hospital before the paramedics, she was able to walk with me to surgery. Seeing how upset she was, I forced a smile and told her that everything would be okay because I had been fixed. I went home after working in the intensive care unit for a few days and staying in the hospital for 2 weeks. The doctor, Dr. Brown, set up a follow-up visit for me and told me I was lucky to be alive. He told me while I was sitting across from his desk that my spleen had been badly hurt and that the main artery to it had to be cut off to stop internal bleeding. He thought it was amazing that I was still alive. It was hard to talk about my experience with other people. Even though I didn't remember much until many years later, I had a hazy memory of something important happening when I was in my early teens. Memories slowly came back to me in dreams and flashbacks. Because I didn't want to talk about it, people might have thought I was crazy or mistaken. But when I was in my late teens and watched a TV show about near-death experiences, the stories really hit home for me. Some parts of their story reminded me of my own. I tell my story to everyone I can now. I want others to feel the deep love and peace I felt. Death no longer scares me like it used to. My religion has changed over the years. I'm now more spiritual and don't follow strict Christian beliefs. I finally stopped hating myself and learned to accept myself, including my sexuality. Part of me still wants to feel like I'm home, even though I've had depression, which is probably caused by bad things that happened to me as a kid. I'm now interested in nature, books, relationships, and having a deep respect for all living things. I have had many psychic premonitions, or what I think is divine knowledge, since the meeting that I had never had before. My life and soul have been deeply changed by that short but life-changing experience with the being. I've thought a lot about my goal in the years since that amazing event. I found it in the end to share my story and what I've learned. It is this process of sharing and understanding that guides me still.